Hey, 42 here. In the year 2000, a small-budget Japanese film by the name of Battle Royale was released to great controversy, with several countries going so far as to ban the movie outright. That probably had something to do with the film's unusual premise, in which a bunch of kids are gassed during a school trip, then taken to a remote island where they're forced to fight to the death. Yeah, not exactly Disney, is it? Even if you've never heard of Battle Royale, which these days is considered a cult classic by the way, the plot may well still be familiar to you. That's because it bears a striking resemblance to one of the biggest book/film franchises of the last couple of decades, The Hunger Games. Both stories are incredibly bloody and brutal, and according to millions of fans around the world, pretty darn entertaining too. But neither The Hunger Games nor Battle Royale has ever been accused of being overly realistic. A load of random people dumped on an island in the middle of nowhere and forced to fight to the death? It just couldn't happen in real life. Except, it turns out, it already has. And the real-life version of The Hunger Games was much, much worse than anything that's ever been dreamt up by the fertile mind of a creative writer. This video is sponsored by X-Sheets, bed sheets for gamers.
After a long day of gaming, you need rest. And now you can get it with X-Sheets, the only LED-powered bed sheets made for gamers. Enjoy maximum nighttime visibility and supercharge your circadian rhythm. Available now at extremrest.com.
Only joking, this video is actually sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Obviously, Raid is the first game to bring a true console-level experience to your phone. They've set the bar high, and there's no going back. With hundreds of artifacts to equip and over 600 champions blessed with unique skills, you can build your team, develop your champions, and raid your way. So, what's new in Raid? Well, Raid's currently running a special Deliana Chase event, where you can get your hands on the amazing Deliana, a brand new legendary champion from the High Elves faction, just by logging in. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and July the 20th, and you'll get Deliana for free. And this is the best time to get started in Raid. All you have to do is click the link in the description and scan my QR code here on the screen, and you'll get a free starter pack worth almost $40. We're talking free champions at once. Misericord, Tiger Soul, and Romero, plus 10 Magic XP brews, 10 Force XP brews, and 10 Spirit brews. That's huge! They gave only one champion out in the past, so don't miss out on your chance to get such big rewards this time. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. New players, listen up. Once you're in-game, just enter promo code MyDeliana to get your hands on everything. You'll get 50 XP brews to instantly get your legendary hero Deliana to the max level of 50, as well as a ton of silver. And I'll see you in-game. When Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had 6,500 prisoners dumped on a remote Siberian island in the 1930s, without food or water, what happened next was so flat-out disturbing that efforts were made to erase any record of the events from the history books altogether. This is the story of Stalin's Cannibal Island, one of history's most horrific examples of what happens when you push human beings far beyond their breaking point. As far as eggs go, Joseph Stalin was a particularly bad one. In fact, if history's most evil dictators were made into top trumps, Stalin would be fighting it out with the likes of Hitler and Pol Pot for the title of best card in the deck, or worst. He rose to become General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1922. And amongst other things, he used those early years to consolidate absolute power over both his party and the country it ruled. You've probably already heard about the infamous purges, in which Stalin systematically eliminated political rivals and basically anyone else who happened to piss him off. In the most famous of those, known as the Great Terror, as many as 750,000 people were executed, and more than 1 million others were sent to forced labor camps known as gulags. But Stalin had other ways of dealing with people he didn't like, beyond simply murdering them to death. The Soviet Union covered about 14% of the Earth's total land area, and the sheer size of the place gave Stalin the option of banishing people he wanted to get rid of to the far-flung reaches of the country and forgetting all about them. Kind of like the evil dictator version of sticking all the relatives you don't like as far away as possible on your wedding seating plan. In all, about 2 million so-called undesirables were forcibly deported during the 1930s, usually to the endless wildernesses of Siberia. Some of these prisoners came from the Soviet Union's overflowing jails. Others were from social classes or ethnic minorities Stalin was slowly eradicating. And still others were unfortunate enough to own things the dictator coveted, usually valuable farmland. It was one of those two birds with one stone kind of affairs. Through forced deportation, not only did Stalin eliminate those undesirables as a threat, he also used their labor to turn millions of hectares of barren wilderness into productive land. Or at least, that was the plan. To begin with, many of the deportees were sent to processing camps in Tomsk, Omsk, and excuse me. From there, they were forwarded on to newly established settlements across Siberia. Hundreds of these settlements appeared on the Soviet map during the 30s, and almost all of them had sorry tales to tell. But for the purpose of this video, we're only interested in one. A tiny island in the Ob River by the name of Nazino. On the 14th of May 1933, 5,000 deportees from the Tomsk camp were rounded up and packed into 4 enormous lumber barges that had been modified to accommodate a human cargo. I say modified, they basically just took all the lumber off and shoved the people on. Anyway, with no accommodations suitable for actual human beings, these deportees were simply shoved below decks and simply forgotten about for the 800-kilometer, 4-day journey along the River Ob from Tomsk to Nazino Island. They were given a pitiful food ration of just 5 slices of bread per day to survive on, and conditions were so bad that 27 people were dead before the barges even reached their destination, with hundreds more in extremely poor health. After the deadly journey along the Ob, it's safe to say the remaining deportees were prepared for their new accommodation on Nazino Island to be worthy of a 1-star TripAdvisor review. But what they weren't prepared for was for the accommodation to not actually exist in the first place. As the 5,000 deportees stepped, crawled, or were dragged from the lumber barges onto the island, they found themselves on what was essentially an empty speck of swampy land in the middle of a freezing river in Siberia. There were no buildings or tents, no toilets or cooking facilities, not even any tools or building materials. Just nothing. To make matters worse, the meager bread ration that had kept the deportees alive on the barge journey, well, most of them, had pretty much run out, which meant the only remaining food to feed the 5,000 already nearly starving people on the island came in the form of 20 tons of raw flour. The men tasked with handing out this precious resource, Nazino Island's newly appointed guards, were woefully unprepared for the task at hand. Almost all were rookies who hadn't even been issued with uniforms yet. And when they first attempted to hand out the allotted 4 kilograms of flour to each prisoner, it's fair to say things didn't exactly go according to plan. Not that that should have come as a big surprise. The deportees were already suffering from an extreme lack of food in what was fast becoming a life or death situation on a frightening scale. Rocking up with 20 tons of flour and trying to give 5,000 people a neat 4 kilograms each was akin to bringing a shitload of heroin to a drug den and expecting everyone to form an orderly queue. As you've probably guessed, the poor souls on Nazino Island did not form an orderly queue. They went absolutely fucking mental. A full-scale riot broke out, and forced to admit defeat, the guards retreated to the relative safety of the lumber barges to devise a new, less dangerous plan for the distribution of the flour. All of which meant that Nazino's 5,000 new inhabitants spent the first night in their new home without food or shelter. By morning, 300 more were dead. The following day, the guards made their second attempt to dish out the flour. The deportees were asked to organize themselves into brigades of 150 people. Each brigade had a self-appointed leader, and each leader was tasked with collecting enough flour for everyone in their group. On paper, that might sound like a fairly sensible idea, but once again, the guards had overlooked the somewhat crucial detail that the people of Nazino Island were already beginning to starve to death. To take that drug den analogy one step further, this new, ordered approach was a bit like giving a select group of addicts a year's supply of heroin, then asking them to share it with a bunch of random strangers. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Most kept the flour to eat themselves, and used whatever was left as a kind of pseudo-currency to gain favor with other powerful deportees. Even the apparently lucky ones who managed to get their hands on some genuine Nazino white powder had no way of turning it into bread, so they were forced to mix it with river water and slurp it down as a kind of paste. The precious calories certainly helped, but the dysentery that resulted from drinking untreated river water, not so much. Within a matter of days, the unimaginably brutal conditions led to a total breakdown in order. Gangs formed around powerful brigade leaders, and skirmishes were fought over the island's meager resources, as people died in their hundreds from a combination of exposure, starvation, and disease. The guards were completely out of their depth and mostly kept to the barges. Still, they were the ones with the food and the guns, and that gave them godlike power over the islanders. A power that, predictably enough, they abused at every opportunity. The guards traded food for favors amongst the island's women, accepted bribes in the form of gold teeth plucked from the mouths of the dead, and occasionally the living, and executed hundreds of deportees for minor infractions. Despite their brutality, the guards were still outnumbered 100 to 1, and they simply didn't have the manpower to maintain genuine control. As a result, hundreds of people came to the perfectly reasonable conclusion that the best way to survive the unfolding horrors of Nazino Island was to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. Not that escape was without risks of its own. For starters, it was punishable by death, and the guards shot anyone they suspected trying to leave the island on sight. Then there was the small issue of the wide, fast-flowing, ice-cold Siberian river that stood between the islanders and freedom. Some fashioned makeshift rafts from bits and pieces scavenged on the island, and others simply swam for it. Almost none made it to the other side. Rafts disintegrated in the strong currents. Swimmers, weakened by weeks of starvation, were overcome by the freezing waters, and dozens of people were shot by guards before their escape attempts even got underway. Before long, hundreds of bodies lined the banks of the Ob downriver from Nazino Island. In truth, even those few lucky ones that managed to survive the crossing probably didn't last long in the never-ending forest that awaited them on the opposite bank. Though at least a couple are thought to have found their way to safety on isolated farms. Still, dying alone in the beautiful, desolate Siberian wilderness was almost certainly preferable to the fate that awaited those who stayed behind. Predictably, the pitiful supply of flour soon ran out, meaning there was quite literally nothing whatsoever to eat. And that's when the hunting began. On the 21st of May, just 1 week after the barges brought the first deportees to Nazino Island, Health inspectors amongst the guards were totting up the day's new corpses when they noticed something disturbing. 5 of the bodies showed telltale signs of cannibalism. Over the course of the following month, more than 50 people were arrested and, in most cases, executed for the consumption of human flesh. And they're just the ones who were actually caught. There are plenty of stories of desperate people resorting to cannibalism after finding themselves stranded without food for long periods. Plane crashes in remote areas, that sort of thing. Typically, cannibalism under these circumstances comes as a last resort. The weakest member of the group dies of natural causes, and the others make the impossible decision to do whatever they have to do to survive. And that's exactly what happened on the Xeno Island. At first. But as time went on, the island's most desperate and depraved inhabitants stopped waiting for the weak to die before making their move. Those who survived Stalin's cannibal island have, unsurprisingly, been reluctant to talk about their experiences there. But what little information has surfaced is so horrific, it doesn't even sound real. Like eyewitness accounts that speak of people being tied to trees and butchered for their meat while still living. You've probably heard of places being described as hell on earth over the years. A shopping mall on Black Friday, or a rough city centre at 1 AM on a Saturday morning. But for 13 weeks in 1933, Xeno Island came about as close to the biblical torment of the fiery pits of hell as anywhere on Earth has ever been. At the end of those 13 weeks of violence, starvation, cannibalism, and death, it seems the powers that be finally started to realise that Xeno Island wasn't about to be transformed into a thriving, productive community anytime soon. And so the settlement was dissolved, and barges arrived to take the surviving deportees away. Some 6,700 people had been sent to the island in total. The initial 5,000 plus 1,700 or so more who arrived over the following weeks. According to official records, by the time the barges arrived to begin evacuations, 2,000 were dead through a combination of starvation, exposure, disease, murder, and drowning. And a further 2,000 had simply disappeared. It's a safe bet that pretty much all of the missing perished one way or another, though exactly how they met their ends, nobody will ever know for sure. All told, just 2,856 people made it out alive. And in most cases, it was a close-run thing. The vast majority were at death's door. According to a report made at the time, only around 200 could be considered to be in good physical health. As for what exactly they must have done for that to be the case, well, I'll leave that up to your imagination. I'd love to be able to tell you that the suffering was over for those who survived the horror of Xeno Island, but sadly, that wasn't the case. They were simply sent to other, slightly better organised settlements elsewhere in Siberia. Considering what they'd been through, it's no surprise that hundreds more died before making it to their new homes. Many truly terrible things happened in the Soviet Union during Stalin's reign of terror. But even on that bloody list, the horrific events that took place on the Xeno Island in 1933 stand out. And it seems that fact wasn't lost on Stalin and his advisors either, because the truth about what happened to the Xeno deportees was never made public. And a report into the incident was buried in the Soviet archives for more than 50 years before being rediscovered by a human rights group. Without their efforts, the world might never have known what really happened on Stalin's cannibal island. And as hard as it is to learn about something so terrible, those are exactly the kind of atrocities that we must never forget. Thank you for watching.